Welcome to the podcast, Food Talks. I'm Dallas Townsend. I will be your host, and I act as the uninformed consumer asking a nutritionist all the questions that you have.
Hello, I'm Jordan Townsend. I'm our resident nutritionist here at Naturally You, and I'm here to inform the uninformed consumer, answering and helping to unpack some of your more difficult nutrition questions.
All right, well, welcome back today. I'm Dallas Townsend, and we are going to be talking about digestion. We've got Jordan in here with us, and he's going to give us the lowdown on how to get your food down and digested.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy that we've been doing Food Talks for almost a year now.
Yeah, I think we started at, I'd have to check, but I'm pretty sure February was the first one.
So yeah,
really the late January.
We're only 2 weeks out, but that's again why we started this, is there's actually too much information to really talk about in just one single episode, that we've gone through all of these different food talks, and we're just now getting to how your body actually processes the food. So that's where I wanted to kind of start with at the very top here, is where it all begins, in the mouth specifically. So digestion is, again, kind of like most of the topics that we've talked about on here, way more complicated than you think. It's that thing you either heard about or you do every day. You just don't, you forget all the moving parts. Case in point is the liver. I always like to point people to our liver episode, because if you go listen to that, you go, oh, I thought that was just for like alcohol and stuff. Same thing here. Well, I thought my digestive system was just to help break down my food. Well, of course, Dallas, but there's a whole other subset of things that it is actually doing for you as well. So let's start at the very beginning. So all of this starts in the mouth. Now, we're starting in the mouth because, one, you have to chew your food. Sometimes not. Sometimes you can't eat liquid, stuff like that. But there's an interesting thing that happens. Now, what do you know about enzymes, Dallas?
Nothing, I would guess.
This is why you're uninformed.
Yeah.
This is why you're the other half of this podcast. It's perfect.
I mean, I've heard of them.
And most people have. That's why I like to always emphasize it and use words like that, because it's funny how much we recognize a term before we actually even know what the term means. Enzymes are essentially, basically, all they are is they speed stuff up. That's the easiest way to think about it. You ever played Mario Kart? You ever hit one of the little arrow things?
You use a mushroom, that's an enzyme?
That's all it is. Well, no, they have the little arrow ramps that literally boost you off. So that's all they do. They physically speed up the chemical reaction. So what would take something an hour or two can be done in 2 or 3 minutes. That's what these things are. The reason I'm starting there is there's only one type of enzyme present in your mouth, and that's amylase. That's the one that helps break down carbs and simple sugars. I always tell people, think breads, nuts, and seeds. The things that humans really started eating as we first started evolving. That's what's so interesting and cool to me about this, is the reason our body is the way it is not for any other reason other than this is something we kept doing. You know, we weren't eating a lot of animals early on. We may not have even been eating any at the very beginning. So you don't have proteins for protein in your saliva. You don't have enzymes for fat in your saliva, because those were things that would get in very, very, very small quantities, and we'll get into that once we go through this whole digestion thing. But because we were eating so many carbs, your body actually starts to already break down and process them as soon as they go in your mouth, before you even start chewing. Case in point for this is, I always tell people, put a cracker in your mouth and put a piece of steak in your mouth. The cracker will eventually dissolve and break down and start to get soft. The steak will be a piece of steak until you forcefully break it down. That's that enzymatic process happening right in front of you. So that's also a reason that carbohydrates act the way they do. By the time they're getting to the engine, they're already completely fully processed fuel. Whereas that steak still has a couple of hours before it's even something you can use as energy. So this is what I like kind of breaking these things down, is because there's reasons foods act the way they do. And a lot of, we've talked about it before on here, the keto episode. That's why fats act the way they do. That's why fats have such a satiating effect on you. That's why they make you feel so full. It's because your body takes so long to actually use that. Whereas carbs, by the time they're past the stomach, they're ready to be used. So this is what's also convenient. This is what makes humans a very interesting animal. It's because we can eat so many things. That's why there's not a single environment on the planet we can't survive in. an easy example of this is cancer cells, because they divide so rapidly, cannot actually break fat down for fuel. Same thing with animals. Cows can only eat grass or hay. They can't eat other cows. They'll get sick, they'll break down. So that's honestly the best survival trait that we got, is we can pretty much eat anything, even ourselves. But we try not to do that. We frown upon that.
Yeah.
But that's what kind of makes the human animal interesting, is we are the pinnacle of what an omnivore is. We are not locked into a single thing. And this is what kills a lot of species. There's a lot of animals that they only eat the algae on top of a pond. Well, the algae on top of the pond goes away, an entire population is completely destroyed. That's what makes us special and kind of helps separate us from the other animals. So we digress. So once you put that first piece of food in, if it has carbohydrates in it, the body's already going to start processing and breaking it down. And that's really all digestion is. I tell people the easiest way to really think about it is you're trying to go from the biggest possible unit to the smallest possible unit. As you would imagine, there's a ton of little individual things that start that. So if you eat the food, next stop is obviously the stomach. So stomach is basically think of a battering ram, if you will. That's kind of the easiest way to think about it. That's that first hard hit to get that food from that solid, the form that you could pick it up and hold it, to some sort of liquid, easy to absorb, malleable thing.
Now, how much does it help when they say chew your food? I mean, what's the real difference between 10 bites, 20 bites, and you sat there for 30 minutes chewing?
Well, I'm actually glad you kind of asked that, because I was going to gloss over it a little bit, but I'm actually kind of glad you said that, because the more you chew, the less work your body has to do. That's really the easiest way to think about it.
Physically breaking it down more.
So this is why I tell people, I have a lot of friends that their whole thing is they eat as fast as they can. They literally, and the food's gone. That is
I'm a little bit like that.
Awful for your digestion. Because the more whole, the larger it is. Remember, you're trying to get from the largest structure. Always tell me to think about this. You're trying to go from a deer to the cell of a deer. That's what's actually happening in here.
Yeah.
So if you take huge bites and don't chew, that means your stomach acid has to work harder. Your pancreatic and liver enzymes have to work harder. More importantly, a lot of it may not even be in the form you can absorb before it's past the small intestine.
Would it just keep you more bloated for longer? Or
that's what can cause some indigestion. That's what can cause your stomach acid to have to get too high, which is what we're going to go into here in just a second. But more importantly, you missed out on the nutrition.
Is that what heartburn is?
Yes.
Okay.
And the clinical term is GERD, or something esophageal reflux disease.
I mean, I know people call it heartburn, but that doesn't make any sense. Why would they say heartburn?
You feel it right there. A lot of times you get pressure and burning right in the middle of that chest. That's the only reason they call it heartburn. That's layman's terms for it, right? It's really just indigestion. But no, that's why chewing your food is so important. The larger it starts, the harder your body's going to have to work to try to get smaller. So the more thoroughly you chew, and the more broken down, and the more already, especially easy example I like to give it, this like a cracker or like a piece of bread. You can chew a piece of bread pretty good. A steak even is going to have, that's why steak acts that way. Even if you chew a steak really good, it's still going to be kind of tricky to even digest and process. So no, excellent question. There's actually quite a bit to that. I want to look at this real quick. Pulling up the pH of stomach acid. So I want to kind of talk about this whole.
How long does it usually take to digest something?
So that's another interesting question, and we'll kind of end with that one. So let's put a pin in that one,
through it.
Just because it changes, right? Depending on what you're putting in, we've seen can take somewhere all the way to 3 to 10 days, depending on how well your digestion's working too. Because if you've got blockages in your colon, if you've got other things that are slowing down the process, a lot of your indigestion could just become from these things staying around too long. Not that you're not even chewing enough; they're not being moved through the conveyor belt fast enough. Because that's the ultimate thing. If you really want to help your digestion, your bowel movements, all of that, water. And I say water because think of yourself as a slip and slide. That's what this whole system is. So the more dehydrated you are, you've been to Derby days at Central Hines. You ever hit one of those dry spots on the Visqueen tar?
It hurts, yeah.
It stops you dead in your tracks. So besides hurting, it literally, you will literally lose all momentum. That's what happens in our guts a lot of times. Especially, think about this, Dallas. We're not the standard, but a lot of people just drink Coca-Cola all day. So
that doesn't lubricate you?
So more important, it's going to dehydrate you. So besides it not, because there is some water in Coca-Cola, but it's so offset by the sugar that it actually will strip water out of the colon to help balance your blood sugar. So that's a whole other subsection of this. Again, you see why digestion and these things, the way you're eating, affect everything. Affect your brain, affect your heart, because your body's having to move resources around to deal with what you just added into it. Which for some people is a Coca-Cola all day. For some people it's sweet tea or coffee all day.
I used to work with this girl. She only drank Dr. Pepper.
Like breakfast, lunch, dinner.
And I thought she was joking, but we didn't have it at work, but she would substitute it with Coke or bring her own Dr. Pepper. She's like, I don't like water. I don't like the taste of it. And that just didn't seem like a problem to her. I was so concerned for her.
Well, one, she will, not could, will have diabetes before she's 40 or 50. There's no doubt.
She had just turned like 21.
Yeah, and again, you can get away with that between 10 and 20 and even 30, but your pancreas will stop. And the thing is, think about just like compare us, that girl and me. Well, let's say we are the exact same. We have the same pancreas, we have the same genes, we have the same everything. My pancreas has done about half the work hers has. So that's what we don't think about with these things, is every time you eat, the real thing you're doing is you just added a bunch of work to your body. Everybody has to go to work, and that's what we're about to get into. We haven't even made it past stomach. That's what I love about this podcast somewhat, is there really is too much to expand on sometimes. And I love that we get to these little tributaries. Let's just start with stomach, because that's the battering ram of digestion. That's the first level of let's take this solid object and liquefy it. Basically, let's get it emulsified. Let's get it broken down. Let's get it into something where we can actually start getting into it. Because as you know, too, think about anything. If you drop a piece of metal ball into water, well, the water's not penetrating it any. Whereas if you can just drill holes into it, now that the salt water or water can get in there, it'll start to rust. It'll start to break down way faster than if you can just, it's a surface area thing. Mm-hmm. So that's the real reason your body's trying to break this stuff down into some sort of like liquid emulsification, is the more broken down it gets, the more surface area. Think about what your small intestines really is. It's this big long tube. So the more parts of the tube you can touch, the more stuff you can absorb. But we digress again. First level is gastric acid, or what we call stomach acid. That's the battering ram. So most stomach acid is... Go ahead.
Well, I was just, when you said stomach acid, I'm just picturing Rugrats or Jimmy Neutron, because...
The strongest acid on the planet, right?
How much acid is in the stomach? How much room? I know there's food. Is there an air pocket, or is it literally just like an enclosed acid chamber that food... comes into?
It's interesting because it's not pure acid, obviously.
Yeah.
There's two sphincters, or there's two seals at the top. And this is actually what causes your heartburn, is that one at the top starts to get weak and the acid leaks out. That's why it hurts so much. That's why it burns and causes that irritation. It's because that acid is not supposed to be on just your normal flesh. Mm-hmm. So yes, it's mostly acid. There might be a little bit of room at the top, because what your body's supposed to do is create a little bit of space. That's why, too, another thing is called silent reflux. That's why one of the worst things you can do is eat something and then go lay down. Well, now you just inverted the way your body's supposed to digest. Yeah. So now that stomach acid is sitting directly up against the hatch.
That makes sense.
And it's not supposed to. So there's supposed to be a little bit of space, too. And this is also kind of what causes heartburn and indigestion. When you eat something, especially, no one talks about this, but what causes heartburn and indigestion is high carb, high sugar. Those are the two big things. The breads at your meal, the desserts at your meal. Pizza is the absolute worst heartburn because it's salted meat if you get pepperoni. It's the carbs of the pizza crust. It's cheese and dairy, which is fat and protein. And tomatoes are acidic, Dallas. Mm-hmm. So that's why pizza and wings, Coca-Colas mess with people way more than anything else. I always tell people, you ever had indigestion from eating a kale salad? Funny how that works, right? It's not that you have GERD. It's not that you have heartburn. You're eating foods that are triggering this body and causing you to have those symptoms. Again, that's what's kind of cool about this. So it's not a big volume. Your stomach is really generally about the size of your fist, maybe a little bigger, but that's just a good idea. The stomach is not large. That's what we always forget. Remember, your small intestines is where all this is actually happening. This is just the battering ram.
How long does it stay in your stomach?
So it depends. Most things usually stay about 20, 30, 40 minutes, depending on how fast, because again, it's what it will, that bottom sphincter will slowly start releasing. The more emulsified and the more broken down, the stuff above it stays in the acid longer.
Now, how does it release it without taking some of the acid with it?
So some of it will go into the actual small intestine, and that's what you call, there's actually a term for that. It's called I think it's called a chyme. It's like CHYME. That's the emulsified mass of all that different stuff. And again, that's what's it. Now remember, some is okay. That's the thing. These sphincters, these little seals are not perfect. Constant, continuous, all day is what causes the problems. Now also think, if you have a north valve and a south valve is supposed to open. That's supposed to let this stuff move down into the small intestine. The north valve, there's no acid that should ever be in the esophagus. That tissue is not made for it. Small intestine's tissue is at least set up, hey, some of the stomach acid is going to come out. Most of it's not. That's why I say it's only supposed to allow a little bit through at a time as it fills up and slowly empties. Now, there's a lot of issues with this. There's something called gastric emptying, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of different diseases where some people's stomachs just let stuff straight through. Well, okay, yeah, your whole system's not going to work right. But the thing about stomach acid is on the pH scale, 7 is neutral. Stomach acid is between 1.5 and 3.5, just depending on the person, what they've been eating, all that stuff. That's extremely strong acid. Because remember, every number, like between a 7 and a 6, if you go from 6 to 5, that's 10 times stronger. So it's exponential, yeah. So 5 to 4 is 10 times stronger. And I think lemon juice is somewhere around like a 5 or a 6. So yeah, that tells you stomach acid is extremely strong.
So it can dissolve everything pretty much.
Essentially. Some things not. A good example of that
out on
is
the table.
A good example of that is corn.
Exactly. How is that possible, dude?
So corn is pure cellulose. So sometimes that pure cellulose, if it hasn't been punctured, won't break down.
You don't chew your corn.
It's hard enough that it won't actually let it get in and break it down.
That's crazy.
Also, how long did it stay in the stomach?
We should start building buildings out of corn.
Well, some pieces will move through faster, some won't, and that's why you don't see them. So that's what's weird. Stomach acid is not. That's why I say it is strong, but it is not military grade acid here.
Even like metals, say you accidentally swallowed a key or something.
Nickel will come straight through, like a coin. It can come straight through.
Sometimes even like in dogs, they eat something, you look in their poop later and it's there. You would think, if stomach acid broke down everything, that wouldn't be possible. But.
Yeah, now you can even leave like a quarter and stuff in Coca-Cola long enough, and Coca-Cola will do that. But how long does it sit in there, right? So that's the thing. The nickel's in your stomach about 15, 20, 30, 40 minutes, depending. Whereas if you took stomach acid in the lab and recreated it and put a nickel in there, well, 48 hours it'd dissolve. So that's the thing. Remember, this is just this is the battering ram. So this isn't really where all the work gets done. This is just turn that hamburger patty into hamburger liquid. So we digress. So as you start to slowly move out of the stomach, as I said, that's why the stomach is stacked like this. I'm showing Dallas, but what I'm showing him is it's kind of got that little bit of a like wiggle to it, and it's kind of like a left to right turn. So you enter in one end, and as the food piles up and breaks down, the stuff that is being broken down and turning into a liquid slowly moves to the bottom. So that's why I say the sphincter at the bottom is releasing and the sphincter at the top is opening as you eat. That's why, too, over time, eventually your stomach will be completely empty. You eat too much too soon, your stomach will feel really, really full and try to stop you. So as things move through, our next level...
Real quick.
Please.
If you eat something... And does it go immediately to the stomach? Is there any stoppage along the way before it enters that first little sphincter?
Well, food, yes. Water, no.
Okay.
So that's the thing. They've done... You ever seen those? You can just Google X-ray of people eating food. You can see them literally as they chew and swallow. It slowly kind of.
So it'll stay for a little while.
It'll slow. And what it is, it's slowly moving down because it's literally still a physical ball. Mm-hmm. So it'll slowly move down. And then that's why I say when it gets right there.
But once it clears your windpipe, you can't choke. It can just stay in there.
Well, no, and it hits that sphincter, and it's kind of waiting. That's the thing. It's supposed to open naturally as the volume underneath. And that's also why eating too fast will cause what we call indigestion or heartburn. You go to Cock of the Walk and you eat 4 fillets, French fries, cornbread, sweet tea.
How do those hot dog champs do this?
So that's a whole other different thing. What they're also doing, too, is they're also, they're using things like water and stuff to help break it down and expedite how fast it can move. They're also not eating for a long time so that they have all this extra thing. My thing is, you remember, whatever you do, your body learns. So if you eat like that regularly and train yourself,
get ready for it, yeah.
It'll speed up your digestion. Because it goes, when he eats a hot dog, he's about to eat 80. So
he never just eats one.
And that's what's weird. They also do those things where they drink things like water where they actually stretch their stomach physically. So they'll fill their stomachs with water to physically stretch it.
Crazy.
Let's not focus on the freaks. That's not what we're doing.
That's
here.
not normal.
But again, that's why a lot of your indigestion can come from just eating too fast because it hasn't had time to properly break down in the stomach and leave. Well, you're already putting more food in.
So it's got to get rid of some of it.
So it is building up and it will move it through too fast. And more importantly, as it moves through too fast, it opens too soon. Well, if it's full and it opens, that's when a little bit of that acid can come north. And that's when it will cause that irritation and that inflammation, what we call GERD or acid reflux.
Okay. So south of the stomach.
So next level. I'm sure you've heard of the small intestines, right?
Yes.
So small intestines, as I'm sure y'all know, that's the long one. That's the one that's like 30 feet that they talk about, right? And it's a snake. That's what's crazy. Is it goes that's really all that central thorax cavity is. So I always tell people, the easiest way to find your stomach is go straight down right where your sternum and all that meets. That's pretty much where your stomach sits. It sits right behind that breastbone right there. So that's the stomach. That's what's weird. And right there to the right is where the small intestine starts. Conveniently located right next to the liver and the gallbladder. And that's what we're going to go into. There's a lot.
I thought I've had stomach pains before, but I think I had more of lower
GI issues.
GI
exactly.
pain.
And that's why I say a lot of times we call I'm full. Whew, my stomach is full. Your stomach's not full. Your stomach's just slowly.
Well, we call this the stomach on the outside, but
Right.
it's not really accurate.
Again, and that's why, like I said, I just like to break these things down so people know what we're actually talking about here, too. So this is interesting as well because the small intestine then breaks down into several sections. Because as you would imagine, all parts of the small intestine are not identical. They're all trying to absorb different things. So that's another interesting part about this. This is when we get into, I've talked about this before, like you read the back of a box of something. It says, well, there's 100 grams of vitamin C in this. Okay. Well, this is when we start getting into what we call bioavailable. So if there's 10,000 milligrams of vitamin C, depending on what you eat with that vitamin C and what's going on in that part of the small intestines where it gets absorbed, depends on if you even absorb any of that vitamin C. So you can take 10,000 milligrams and absorb 0 if you eat the wrong foods with it. If you eat other things that the body sees as more important, it'll actually go for those instead.
So that's where the absorption of like nutrients comes from, is your small intestine.
Small intestines does everything.
Going through the
else.
acid doesn't affect any of that, I'm assuming.
Well, remember, they're trapped. That's the thing, when we're starting to talk about these different nutrients, things like fatty acids, carbohydrates, peptides from proteins, amino acids, those things are trapped in these huge forms that can't fit through because that's the thing, is when you get to the small intestine, you get to the hairs. Those little cilia hairs, the way the food gets absorbed is as it drags across that, the smaller, more broken down parts get absorbed underneath. That's why your intestinal tract is so long. The body said, look, we have a history. The shorter we make these, the more people die. The longer we make this, the more chance we get them to get every single bit of nutrition out of this, the better you do. So that's what's actually our biggest benefit, is we're unlike cows. Cows have one food source. That's why they have 4 stomachs. Because their stomachs have to keep recycling that cud to break it down to a form they can use. Ours said, look, you can eat anything. We're just going to give you a long intestine so that you can actually absorb. So if you do eat fat, we can actually manage to get all of the calories, all of the nutrients, all the vitamins out of that fatty acid too. If you eat a protein, we're going to give you a long intestine so that we have plenty of time to get all the amino acids, all the iron, everything out of that. So that's where we're very different, and that's what makes us omnivores. We have a long, small intestine. So that's where you really do all the work. Small intestines is where the rubber meets the road, essentially. And it breaks down into 3 parts. So the first one is called the duodenum. That's the short, very beginning structure right after the small intestine. Right after the stomach. So this is where the interesting stuff happens. All of your minerals, all of those things get absorbed right there. Also, a lot of your carbohydrates get absorbed there as well. So this is where it's interesting, too, is sugar actually competes with minerals for absorption. So those Flintstone gummy vitamins that taste sweet, you're wasting your money. Because sugar is a smaller molecule. It outcompetes things like calcium. It outcompetes things like zinc and iron and selenium. Because one's C6H12O6. The other ones are these huge mineral molecules. That's the thing. If you just look up some of those simple ones like iron. Iron's like, what, a 16 or a 25 or something on the periodic table?
16 sounds right.
Something like that. So again, that's about 2 to 3 times the size of a sugar molecule. So that's what's really interesting. Also, right here is where the first of your gastric juices start to come in. So remember, acid is the stomach. That's that first hit.
26.
26. Like I said, I knew it, and that's all I'm saying is iron is very large. Where if you look at what the carbon is 6, hydrogen is 1, and oxygen is like 8. So it's just a smaller molecule, meaning it's a lot easier to break down and process. Whereas you have 1 iron, that could be the size of 2 or 3 glucose molecules. We digress. So this is the very first part. This duodenum is where everything first starts being absorbed. But this is immediately where your pancreas, to the left of your body, if you're looking down at yourself, and your liver and your gallbladder come in. They both secrete directly into that duodenum. So as soon as things come through, basically the body said, as soon as it gets through the stomach, we've got to get as much digestive juice on this as possible to fully break it down even more. So that's why I say most of your big nutrient stuff, your vitamins, your minerals, all of that is right in that very first part. The problem is it's very short. Of the entire colon, or the entire small intestine, which is about 30 feet, it's only about 9.5 inches, 10 inches. So about 1 foot.
How long does it stay in there?
So the problem is it's moving at all times. Gravity and, more importantly, those cilia are kind of vibrating. So think about it like sort of like one of those at the airport, one of those little electric runways. Mm-hmm. That's what's going on at all times. Everything is slowly being moved south. This is why, by the way, this is why constipation is actually a serious health issue. Because if you're not moving stuff, all types of problems start to show up. Because the body never planned for things, like you just said, to just sit there. That's also why it's very hard to absorb all your minerals. Because if you eat the wrong foods with them, Dallas, you ate all that calcium, none of it got absorbed. It already moved past that part. We're already to the jejunum, which we're going to get to in just a second, but that's the second part of the small intestine. So if you miss that little first part right after the stomach, nothing gets absorbed anyway. So this is why digestion is such a tricky game. It's not just what you're eating, it's how much of it you're eating, how much of it's bioavailable, and what you're eating it with to even allow you to get that nutrition. So right at the beginning, duodenum, that's where your pancreas dumps in things like insulin. Maybe you've heard of that. Bile, which is what helps us as mostly water humans. Bile is the reason we can actually eat fat and absorb it properly. So next, there's a lot of different little things there. Helps emulsify, blah, 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 blah. So that's nice. That's where you're getting all your vitamins, your minerals, and stuff like that. So remember, that the crazy thing about that is it's only about half a foot. It says it's between 7.9 and 9.8 inches. That's crazy. So when you go to the jejunum, which is the midsection of the small intestine, it's about 2.5 meters. So look at the difference in that. You have less than a foot, and you have about 6 feet-ish. Because what is it? I think a meter is about 3 feet.
Let me check.
So 2.5 is going to be closer to really like...
It's 2.7 yards.
Okay, yeah, so... But I think there's 3 feet in a yard.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're looking at about 9 to 10 feet in this next one. So that's what's so interesting too, is your body really, in a perfect world, the duodenum would be way longer. Give these things a lot more chance to be absorbed. But what it is those are usually the most important. That's why they hit first. So the second part here is, this is when you really start to get to things like your sugars, your fatty acids, your amino acids. bulk up is what you got to think of. So start small with the vitamins and the minerals. Next thing is when you're getting into like full-on proteins are getting digested. Because that's the thing. Remember, proteins go from proteins to peptides to amino acids. Carbs go from carbohydrates to monosaccharides to glucose specifically. Fats go from fat to these fatty acids to then eventually different triglycerides. So that's what the thing is. Remember, it's always going big to small, big to small. So this is where all that really starts to happen. The jejunum is pretty big, but that's why it's so long. Because the body knows the carbs are going to be easy and first, but that protein and that fat, we're going to need time. So that's what's just so crazy. Your body gave you 1 foot for the vitamins and the minerals, gave you 10 feet for the fats and the proteins. So it's just interesting. It knows exactly how long these things are going to take. And that brings us to our last section, which is called the Ilium. So this one's about 3 meters long. And this is the final stretch before you get to what we call the large intestine. Now, this one's kind of even more interesting is because mainly things like vitamin B12 and the bile is even starting to be reabsorbed here. So remember, bile is that nice little thing that helps us absorb fat, but it can be recycled. So this is what's nice is your liver does make bile. Most of it can be reabsorbed and restored. That's why you have a gallbladder. The gallbladder is for the storing of bile for as you need it. So it's needed for basic digestion, but the body will recycle it, reuse it. Now, this is why not having a gallbladder can be such an issue. Every single time you eat fat, your body has to make bile on the spot. The liver has to produce it for this digestive process. All that means is I don't get to do what else you were doing. Maybe you're on a medication. Maybe you need to make cholesterol. I have to stop doing all of those things just to make bile so that this whole little process can happen. And yeah, so that's what's weird. That's where the last little bits of anything left is that last little kind of 9 to 10 feet of the last stretch.
So as it leaves the small intestine, is that small intestine just connected to the large? And it
So
just
yes.
all of a sudden becomes large?
And large is interesting because large is kind of the end of the road, and large is actually where you shift from absorb to waste storage. So that's what's crazy is people forget the small does all your work. Large intestines is just a waiting area for exit. It's basically you're in the terminal waiting to board your plane. Because once you make it to the large intestine, this is also where where your gut flora starts. Because remember, there should not be any bacteria in the small intestines. That's what we call SIBO, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which is when a lot of those good and bad bacteria start moving north looking for food. This is why fiber is important, everybody. Besides making this whole thing move through easier, it actually is what feeds the good bacteria. So large intestine is that. It's the storage because that's where all the back half of digestion happens as far as what you're mainly doing with your large intestine is anything left over is getting processed and broken down there. So this is where fiber will start to be. It'll feed the good bacteria. Also, this is where you absorb most of your water. So the body doesn't even waste time with water on the small intestines. Small intestine is all about vitamins, minerals, carbs, proteins, fats. Once you get to this one, it's really just storing waste in water. Storing waste in water, storing waste in water. So once you've gotten through the small intestines, the large intestines really isn't doing anything.
So, this might sound gross, but when it comes out of the small intestine, is it already poop?
By that point, it's been close. It's been rendered to pretty much a colorless mass, if you will. Think like a gray-brown mass, because all that color, all that nutrient, everything that has been pulled out of it, if it was able to.
And where's the brown come from?
So that's the thing. Brown's similar to black. Black is when there's no light being reflected, meaning when you make paints. You ever painted?
Yes.
How do you make black?
You just basically mix every color?
Mix everything. That's what ends up happening. All those juices, all that breakdown, all that stuff has rendered it down to pretty much just a black or brown colorless mass. There's not really much left in it that was actually nutrients.
Is there any correlation to the colors of your
Oh,
feces?
for sure. Well, obviously you're eating more green stuff. Some of the green will get through all that. And then they tell you, like, if it floats, you're not processing fat. If it sinks, then you're actually absorbing a lot more of your fat. But what happens too, that's what I can say. Even when it gets to the large intestines at first, it is just like a liquidy, soft mass. As it goes through, that water is pulled out. That's why I say most of your water absorption happens there.
For some people. What if it's not?
Well,
What
just
if you're
normally.
having, like, you know...
Well, Dallas, this is why they don't. This is why they can remove your colon. They don't really remove your small intestine if they don't
You
have
mean your
to.
large intestine?
That's the name for the colon. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Large intestine and colon are synonymous. So that's actually kind of a confusing term. But yeah, I apologize. You can cut people's colon out. People can live without a colon, actually, completely. You cannot live at all without a small intestines.
You just have to have a, was it colostomy?
Colostomy bag, but they can also even shorten it. But see, this causes issues. Because remember, the brain, the body, the biology have a set up timetable for this. So if I cut out 3 feet of your colon, well, hey, stuff's ending up here too soon, which means I'm having to change the way I do stuff, having to speed stuff up, put stress on the body. So yeah, that's what's really interesting, is the colon is mostly just pulling water out of that, solidifying it, making it easier to move through. This is also why a lack of water is so devastating. This is where your constipation is starting. It's once it's been through all that process and it's ends up in the colon, if it is already too dry and too hard, that's when you start to get what we call impacted and stuff like that starts to happen. Because now all of a sudden this thing is dried out and solid as a rock and nothing's pushing
So
it.
say you were in the desert for a week with no water. I mean, what's going to kill you first when you have no water?
Well,
I mean,
simple
is it just
dehydration,
pretty
just
much all over? Everything's going to break down?
Organ failure. That's the thing.
You're not worried about your poops not moving,
Well, remember,
really.
Jesus lived in the desert for 40 years. So that's not the problem. That's not the issue either, even if you have enough water. The problem is, too, more importantly, you'll stop peeing. Your body will stop wasting any water. It'll stop digestion eventually, too. Guys, the brain is not working.
I was about to say, you'll probably get delirious
So,
first.
yeah, organ failure
You're not
is
really
what
worried
kills you
about
there.
your poops not moving.
But no, that's what, ask anyone who's dehydrated. They get very hard, very solid ones. That's not good. That's
I
why
think
too,
I'm too hydrated.
on carnivore diet too, a lot of times that happens. You get those really hard, solid rock ones. That's just almost like little rabbit stuff. So not good. But that's really all the large intestine. It holds all of our gut flora, which is the second half of our immune system. But also is more about water balance and removing and recycling that water from that whole digestive process.
Gotcha.
And then you're at the end. From potato to poop.
We're just poop making machines. That's really all we are.
Acquire calories, reproduce. I always tell my clients,
Make poop.
I'm not trying to simplify you down and tell you you're not important. You're here to acquire calories and reproduce. Everything else is icing. Banks, weddings, marriage, all this crazy parties, all this stuff we do. That's icing on the cake. But you're here to get calories, because if you get calories, you can pass your genes on. If you pass your genes on, you did what you were here for. Good job, human. Dopamine.
From the body's perspective, why is that all the body cares about? Self-preservation?
What's the name in the body? It's biology. Why do birds nest, right? Why do they fly 7,000 miles? Oh, we don't get eaten down here. None of our eggs die. So to them, hey, by the way, I'm a bird. I have no other thoughts or wants or desires in the world other than find another bird, eat enough seeds and caterpillars along the way, lay some eggs. I've done my duty. If I die, that's great. If I get another flush, great.
And that's why we're not birds.
Yeah, exactly.
We want more.
We're more advanced. But don't forget what the other half of you is. Animal. We've talked about this in one of our recent podcasts.
I feel like we need to talk about birds' poop, because what is up with that?
Birds actually don't have a urinary tract.
Do they even
That's
have
all
intestines?
Yeah, they do. They don't have a urinary tract.
So they just do it all at once.
It's one single
Yeah,
thing.
that makes
Exactly.
sense.
And Dallas, you'll probably notice most mammals are a little more advanced as far as their biology goes.
Oh, for sure.
The more you regress back into fish.
Bro.
Well, fish, right?
How long is the blue whale's intestines?
I mean, have you ever seen their heart? Their heart's the size of this room.
Yeah. Oh, my gosh.
So, yeah, exactly. But also, how many tons of krill are they eating?
How do they find so much krill? That's what I don't understand.
Well, krill is almost microscopic. So what they're
Exactly.
doing is they're just taking in huge volumes of water and filtering it out. So it's a volume
That's
thing.
crazy.
You take enough. But Dallas, why did they get so big? Hey, we're not getting enough krill at this size. We probably need to double.
Just so we can filter more water.
Exactly. And then eventually you kind of find that sweet spot between it's not advantageous for a blue whale to get bigger, right? But at this size, we're completely sustainable. We have no predators. That's a benefit. Also, we can now take in enough calories that we can reproduce. So you see how the cycle fulfills on itself. If you're successful at finding calories and reproducing, you thrive. As soon as the algae on the lake dries up, though, your whole population could be gone.
That's crazy to think about. Because, I mean, were blue whales small ones? I don't...
One of their ancestors were, sure,
Yeah, I
right?
guess so.
But think about it. Why do we have 19 different types of whales, Dallas? They all found their niche.
That's true.
There's sperm whales, there's orcas, which aren't even whales. So they found their niche. Hey, this works for us, and we can acquire calories, and we can make more. Good job, whale. Here's dopamine. See, because that's what's weird. We don't really want to talk about it, but dopamine and serotonin are pretty much universal brain chemicals.
For all animals, too.
I mean, how else do you send the signal? How else does the deer know that it's doing what it's supposed to do?
True.
Right? I got a reward. I ate acorns give me more of a reward than a food plot.
Well, they say it's instincts. What are they talking about when they say?
Well, a lot of that instinct, too, is, think about it like this. Sea turtles, right? As soon as they hatch, they immediately start walking towards the ocean. Well, that's because a lot of sea turtles hatched and didn't. They all died. So
how does that pass on to the new set? The ones
over
that made
time,
it?
which over time, hey, when you get out of the egg, if you don't, because the thing about this is an instinct, right? Think about it as a program. If you were a coder, some of those turtles' code had nothing to do with what they needed to do from the beginning. They died. Some of them wrote hard code in that said immediately go to ocean.
This is kind of ironic because I saw a meme today literally about this. It was, do you remember that scene in Forrest Gump where they're walking through the forest and they first get ambushed and he's on the ground and he's crawling? And it said sea turtles' first moments when they hatch from the egg. He's like crawling on the beach.
Well, yeah, they're getting picked off by
Gunshots are
birds.
coming
They're
over.
getting eaten by crabs.
Oh, yeah.
It's crazy.
Because all the other animals live off catching these turtles,
Acquire calories.
waiting for them to hatch.
Turtles are just the convenient calories right now.
But we've gotten way off from the stomach, which we tend to do, but
We always have to end like this.
you can always wrap a turtle back into the stomach somehow.
So yeah, but again, that's what it comes down to, is your body has got to get the most out of what you get in. Just think about it. This is how you can kind of wrap it all up. Well, why can some animals eat sea turtles and some can't? Right? Why are the birds out there picking them off, but you don't see like other animals doing it? They may not be able to digest that shell. If you can't digest that shell, it'll kill you.
Yeah.
If it kills you, you didn't make it. You didn't acquire calories. You didn't reproduce. So there's not going to be any more of you that eat shells. So that's what's weird, is we look around and we just think, oh yeah, this is the world. The world got this way somehow.
And it's still changing.
Time, right? Yeah. Time and environment. That's what makes things
Maybe
adapt.
we should extinct more animals, you know? Maybe that's...
We're in a mass extinction event right now.
Maybe that's on the plate.
Have you seen anything about the bugs, though? How most major insect species, but...
Pretty sure everything's going extinct.
We call them pests and we hate them. But remember, insects make up the base of what, like, birds and fish eat. So that's not good for your ecosystem.
Man, we don't eat fish. We'll just factory farm fish.
Me and you are going to tell our kids about yellowtail salmon one time, and tuna, I should say. It's not going to be around.
Probably not tuna. Tuna's getting really fished out, but
Maybe
probably
so.
good for your stomach. Who knows? But all right, that is our digestion episode. Jordan, you have any thoughts to take us out on? Anything you want to add we didn't cover?
Chew your food.
Chew your food, yeah.
As much as
20
you can.
times? Is there a limit?
They say, a good example they say is when you think you're about to swallow, stop. Chew it about 5, 6, 7, 8 more times.
That just seems like a lot of work.
And it is. That's why we eat fast. We're annoyed. How quick can I get this in? I want to move on. But we also live these busy lives. Think about what food used to be. You used to relish your food, man. And we killed a deer. Everybody's going to sit around. I'm going to take my piece. I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to chew it.
Weren't we talking about
well
that the
and
other
savor
day,
it.
how there's not enough banquets anymore and, like, gathering of people?
Well, yeah, we forget that that's what the original social structure was.
Can we pass a law where you have to eat a feast with your neighborhood at least once a year?
Well, yeah, but that was also a way of giving physical social rank to people. Where do you sit at the table? You know what I mean? Are you at the top of the table or are you at the end? Well, people know just by where you got sat if you're important enough to even talk to.
And some people just want to be at the table.
Yeah. Think about the dogs, right? The dogs literally just, I'm cool with this. So...
Awesome. Well, thanks
Another
for
good one.
listening. Chew your food, as you just heard, and we will see you next time.
Take it easy, folks.